Well, today is kind of a somber day, somber anniversary, especially if you were alive at the time and you can remember it. But today marks, incredibly, 57 years since John Fitzgerald Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, while in a motorcade. He was on his way to speak at a luncheon, and he was shot dead. And Governor John Connally of Texas, who was a Democrat then, he was seriously wounded. And anybody with a bit of honesty knows who did it. And it was Lee Harvey Oswald. And why he did it. Because he was a loser and he wanted to make his mark in history. And he was a total whack job, who in turn, and we know what happened to him, and if you were like me and were alive then, you saw Oswald's murder live on television. He was murdered by Jack Ruby, who was also a wacko. And Jack Ruby killed Oswald to spare Jacqueline Kennedy the ordeal of a trial. But of course, what Jack Ruby didn't understand then, but was by killing Oswald, he gave birth to the idiotic conspiracy industry. And probably more money has been made off the Kennedy family than the Kennedy family ever actually made. There's endless biographies, cottage industries, and a big chunk of that, the Kennedy industry, is about the assassination. But these days, although the conspiracy theorists ran rampant for decades, and almost as soon as Oswald pulled the trigger, even though it's faded out over the years, not just because the main purveyors have died off or retired, but also forensics has pretty much conclusively proven what the Warren Commission had concluded at the time, was that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. And this is kind of a peculiar thing in American history, is usually when political figures are assassinated, it's usually one person has done it. And it's kind of like individualism having gone apeshit, especially with these people who are not all there in the head to begin with and do this. So we know, if we're honest, we know Oswald acted alone. We know that Ruby acted alone. We know that Sirhan acted alone when he killed Robert Kennedy in 1968. We know that Arthur Bremer, who was released from prison a couple of years ago, he acted alone when he shot and paralyzed George Wallace back in '72. We know that Squeaky Fromm and Sarah Jane Moore acted alone when they attempted to take the life of President Gerald Ford. And we know that, what's his name? And I can't even think of it. Hinckley, I think it was. John Hinckley tried to kill President Reagan. So it's always individual. And you go even before that time, really, with John Wilkes Booth and that Shulgos guy, and I forget who the other one was, but they were always loners. And with old Booth, yeah, he had some people helping him hide out and stuff, but it was all lone people. So this was individualism. But all the conspiracy theories have been debunked. What they were doing, these con artists that were making money off of it, all they were doing was finding a motive and finding a reason for JFK's death. That it had to be something bigger than just some stupid 24-year-old order filler in a book warehouse who emigrated to Russia. He was going to renounce his U.S. citizenship or something. He went to Russia, and I mean, and who the hell did that back then? You know, back during the Cold War. But the Russians wouldn't have him, and then the Cubans wouldn't have him. Hell, his wife wouldn't have him. Nobody wanted him. He was the classic loser. But he thought he was something more important than what he was. And he decided he was going to be a figure of some importance, and he sure as hell was. But not in a good way, of course. But anyway, yeah. So the conspiracy theories have kind of gone the way out. And this one here from the Daily Beast talked about another this conspiracy theory between Lee Harvey Oswald and Communist Cuba. The Cubans wouldn't even have him. Castro wouldn't have anything to do with him. But there was always some fairy tales about that. But it was debunked. Of course it was debunked. Nobody wanted him. He was mentally off his rocker. Of course not. And of course the conspiracy was all in Oswald's head. There was no one else. Remember, he killed a police officer in front of witnesses, several witnesses, and they conclusively proved that he did it. And of course, if he did that, he had to have done the other. He had to have committed the assassination because both guns were traced to him. So it's stupid. And then another thing, you know, for years I even swallowed this conspiracy shit. I mean, at first I didn't, but you know, as the conspiracy theorists were hogging up everything, and then I fell sucker for it. But then I'm reminded of that mock trial they had that featured the late Vincent Bugliosi and gosh damn it, I can't even think of his name. But anyway, he was in there, and god damn it, who was the other lawyer? Oh, let me find out who the hell it was. JFK. I should know this. Can't even remember. Yeah, it was the trial of Lee Harvey Oswald. Why can't I? Jerry Spence, yeah. Jerry Spence. And, you know, he had an impossible task to try to cast out. I mean, it was ridiculous. But the first witness that they had for that mock trial was this guy that drove Oswald to work every day, or most of the days. And Oswald had this package. And he had said that Oswald said there were curtain rods in it. And then that triggered the memory from when in my childhood that I remember that there was those curtain rods. And you know, these conspiracy theorists never explained what the hell happened to the curtain rods, because there were no curtain rods. That's why. It was Oswald's rifle that was in that package. And I thought, you know, at that point I thought, people ought to be ashamed of themselves. They really ought to be ashamed of themselves for having believed a bunch of crap. We always knew what happened on that day in Dallas. All those years ago, that weekend, we know who did it. We know who killed Oswald. And there's nothing left to explain. Everything has pointed to it. And the reason, as I said, the conspiracy theorists have kind of gone by the wayside. Those still large segments of the population still believe this nonsense. The reason that it's faded is because of forensics, and forensics is pretty well buttressed the so-called lone gunman theory. To argue against it now is like arguing in favor of the earth being flat. And it's no more an issue as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, this day in history has always been a sad one, and I was 8 years old, almost 9, when that happened, and I was in 3rd grade. And I remember being in the cafeteria, or they brought us into the cafeteria right about the time of our lunch hour, and they told us what had happened. And then we were sent home for the rest of the day, and of course that weekend. But when you go through that, live through that time, you never forget it. And the whole, you can find channels on YouTube, for example, that have the complete news coverage. And what they did is they would show it, you know, around the clock. And of course it was rerun several times. So like I downloaded the CBS coverage, and everything's there except the concert and then a roundtable discussion about it. But everything else is there as it was during the time. But anyway, yeah, it's time to bury the conspiracy theories, because we've always known what the truth was of that, what happened during that fateful day in Dallas.